Here we go. Good morning and welcome to Accomplices for Justice Take 3. Since I put the word out there and was hoping to be joined by my normal accomplice, Reverend Wylie Hughes, but he seems to be busy with something I am sure very important, because he wouldn't not be here if it were not important. So right now, I'm going to talk for a little bit, and if Rachel or Reverend Tanya or anybody else who shows up has any questions, feel free to ask. You can ask in the chat. If you want to ask directly, you can, of course, unmute yourself and start your video, which I will allow you to do now. And then it will be great to continue this conversation. Sorry that I didn't allow that before, but now we can do that. In the meantime, our topic for today was wide-ranging. I'm going to start on this idea of a book that I put forward called White Christian Privilege. And Rachel, in fact, responded to this via an email to me saying that there is no such thing as white privilege. And as a white person who has many advantages, I am going to offer that the challenge with the term white privilege, and we're not talking about that today, we're talking about white Christian privilege, which is something totally different, is that it turns out that many people in this country who happen to be white don't feel like they have advantages, and we are correct. That the majority of white people in this country, while they do have many advantages, don't feel like they have advantages. So that undermines this white privilege argument for many people. And however, our conversation today is not specifically about that. It's about white Christian privilege. And here is Catherine Schweitzer. I will admit her. Welcome, Catherine. So what do we mean by white Christian privilege? Well, I'm referred to a book, this book called White Christian Privilege, The Illusion of Religious Equality in America by Kayati Y. Joshi. She's an amazing South Asian American professor. And she divides up the elements of white Christian privilege into three different categories. The first is norms, that white Christians, specifically white Protestant Christians in this country, enjoy a series of norms that make everybody else struggle. So, for example, originally in this country, Sunday was a day off. And Jews who worked on Sundays were prosecuted for working on Sundays. And Jews who took Saturday off just lost business for taking their own Sabbath off. So that is a norm that actually made it into policy. For that matter, a number of states in this country from the founding onward had state religions in violation of the First Amendment. So this idea that there is no establishment of any religion by Congress did not prevent the state of New York for establishing Anglicanism or Episcopalianism, I think, as the state religion at some point. Furthermore, we have some real serious norms at the fundamental level of the way we do business in this country at the government level. Invocations are provided at the opening of state legislatures on a regular basis and the opening of our Congress on a regular basis. And up until the last 20 or 30 years, those invocations have always been led by a Protestant minister, sometimes a Catholic. So we have serious norms on this. When a friend of mine, that's actually mentioned in the book, White Christian Privilege, a Hindu Pandit, he is a Hindu dignitary from Reno, Nevada. His name is Rajan Zed. And Rajan has made it his mission to address House legislatures, houses and Senate and assemblies in each state with an invocation. When he offered an invocation at the US House of Representatives at our Congress, there was a protest. There was a protest outside and inside. That protest was also voiced when he led in the state of North Dakota. So he is trying to do the pluralist thing in this country, which is have a multiple religious principles in public, and those are viewed as not merely contrary and threatening, but un-American, because white Christian Protestant Americans say that this is a Christian country. So there we are, and Nanette Massey is joining now, which is great. And I just got a text from our friend Reverend Hughes, who is trying to get in. I hope he will be able to. I will try and make sure he has the link. So that is white Christian privilege from the norms perspective. There are other ways in which white Christian privilege asserts itself. We have norms. We have the other term that she uses is hegemony. And there's one other term, which I have forgotten off the top of my head, which is a problem. But in any event, so Rachel's original question about whether or not there are these issues of privilege is very worth entertaining, because again, it's not necessarily a helpful concept for many people. And I accept that. However, one of the things that we struggle with is that when people start talking about privilege, they often say, but I'm not privileged, and how can there be such a thing as, privilege if I don't get it? And part of the issue is that the people who are getting it don't see themselves as getting it. And the people who feel like they are unadvantaged also don't see themselves as advantaged. So there's it is not necessarily a helpful term all the time. And I am in the process of emailing our friend Wylie the link. So give me a moment. Did anybody have any questions on this stuff so far and why we might be talking about it at all?
Well, Rabbi, I think that white privilege, I've run into that and discrimination when I lived in Oklahoma because I was Jewish. Here in California, actually in Washington, my boss is a Mao atheist, and even inviting someone to go to a kayaking trip that had other Jewish members was, that was terrible. And I was proselytizing, and all I was suggesting was that we had a kayak group. But I think that the idea of white privilege and Protestantism, I think I think that ship has sailed in the East and West Coast, and it probably will sail shortly in the center of the country as well.
That would be a nice thing if it were the case. We have Pastor Hughes who has joined us, and we jumped right in, Pastor Hughes, on the white Christian privilege question. And Rachel just pointed out that in certain workplaces, the norms are in fact non-religious, and that merely trying to gather people together on for the sake of a social gathering that had a Jewish theme was viewed as problematic, proselytizing, as it were. But in any event, let's restart and reintroduce ourselves now that we've got Pastor Hughes here. So thank you so much for joining us. Our topics for today are wide-ranging, and I figured I'd jump right in on the question of white Christian norms and the challenges that are as defined by Professor Joshi in her book. And we have a couple of other topics, and I'm going to let Reverend Hughes select how he wants to introduce himself and how he wants to start talking. We had mentioned how white supremacy and winners take all capitalism stand in the way of seeing paths forward and more ideas about what we can do about it. We had talked about public discourse, how we can rekindle and improve it. And then I'm raising this whole question about, is it possible to really use the teachings of our faith traditions to make progress when we have sort of this white Christian nationalist hegemony? So with that, I'm Rabbi Jonathan Freirich. I think most everybody already knows me, but Reverend Hughes also is well known. So Reverend Hughes, say something about yourself and offer a comment to keep us going.
The most electrifying. No, I'm Reverend Dr. Wylie Hughes. I'm pastor of Orchard Park Presbyterian Church in Orchard Park, New York, and I am happy to be here again.
Fantastic. So, so any thoughts on any of these topics before I continue to talk?
Yeah, can of worms, can of worms. But and I guess maybe put them in the chat because I missed a few of them. I was getting my microphone, my headphone thing was going in and out, so I missed a few of the topics that you mentioned. But if you put them in
Okay,
the
so
chat,
I will
yeah,
put them back in the chat for
yeah,
everybody to see.
so I could weigh in on
And
them.
and in the meanwhile, on this question of while you're reviewing that, I'm going to share something. Oh, sorry, that's to the wrong group. Here we go. There we go. I'm going to share something from some research in a paper that I did with regard, and again, on the white Christian privilege or the white Christian norms. I don't know if many of you know that the decision to make abortion difficult again in this country was phrased really in religious terms. Most recently, an evaluation, well, this is actually not an immediately recent evaluation, but this is from an article called Religious Freedom and Abortion in November of 2022 by Micah Schwartzman and Richard Schrager. And this is about the Supreme Court and free exercise. And their paragraph reads, the court's recent innovations in free exercise doctrine will invariably favor certain religious believers over others, raising a broader question about whether it is possible for liberal and progressive believers to vindicate their claims to religious freedom. In the abortion context, those who demand exemptions to advance their belief that life begins at conception will receive them, while those who demand exemptions to protect their belief that life begins later, or that health and life of pregnant individuals are of paramount importance, will not. In this way, free exercise exemption doctrine serves as an instrument of religious preferentialism. I'm going to put this quote in the chat if I can, but I think it's very important to see this, that what we have seen the Supreme Court do recently in the last couple of years, both in terms, I mean, the number of cases are legion. So obviously in the Dobbs decision, where one religion's definition of when life begins takes preference, and there is a subsequent court case in Indiana where Hoosier Jews for Choice has brought a case saying that their religious doctrine requires them to have access to abortion. And this is true from a certain Jewish perspective. The critique of that, of course, was from a white Protestant Christian organization that decided that to call into question the authentic religious conviction of these Jews because they weren't necessarily Orthodox Jews. And this is an essential aspect that Professor Joshi points out, which is when we are talking about religious rights in this country, white Christian Protestants often say, oh, we don't need to give the Jews that day off because they're not that serious about Judaism. After all, they don't really keep kosher, they don't really keep the Sabbath. Why are they asking for Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur for Passover off? And so no one gets to question why we have Christmas or Easter off, because we do. No one gets to say, oh, no, you don't get Christmas off. You're not that serious a Christian. You don't go to church every week. So this is one of the avenues. And of course, it's much more terrifying with regard to, say, abortion. It's much more terrifying with regard to the fact that, say, somebody runs a website business and decides that just because at some point or another, somebody might ask them to make a website whose lifestyle they disagree with on religious grounds, that means they can challenge the entire law that requires businesses to accommodate other people. Not that they've had anyone ask them to do this, but in the hypothetical, or that somebody can lead Christian prayer on the 50-yard line of a football field and advance the players that they coach based on whether or not they show up and are enthusiastic, and still get it preserved as freedom of religion, even though they are establishing a norm that says, show up and pray with me so that you get a favorable advancement on the field. I think I've caught you up a little bit, Pastor Hughes.
Did you talk about what Christian nationalism is?
I haven't yet.
Okay.
Do you want to talk about that?
Maybe that's a good place to start, because
okay,
it is a very recent it is a very recent phenomenon when it's put into its context. And while I'm not an expert I'm not an expert on it. From my own research and from my own readings, this is another political maneuver. The idea and the concept of Christian nationalism, not even talking about the white aspect of it, but Christian nationalism in and of itself has been around for a while, but the white Christian nationalism is a new thing. And it's
so I'm going to ask you to be specific here, because
okay.
I feel like we need to be concrete.
Okay.
Would we have defined Washington, Jefferson, Madison as white Christian nationalists?
No. They would not have described themselves.
What's the evidence saying no for that?
Well, I mean, again, I can Google some of the words of the founding fathers themselves, who were strictly against merging church and state in the first place. They felt that a person's religion, that their person's faith is a private matter, and it should not find its way into politics. James Madison said this specifically. Ben Franklin said this specifically. So a lot of the founding fathers of our country, while they may have practiced Christianity in whatever form or denomination, were not of the idea that the nation, that America, should be a religious nation. Yes, religious freedom was paramount, but calling it a Christian nation was totally not in the plans.
And this was a break, to a certain extent, from some of the founding of some of the states.
Well, of course.
Right. So the founding of Massachusetts as a state being different than the founding of Massachusetts as a colony, right? Where we have a colony that is founded so that the Puritans might be able to practice their religion freely, but not necessarily so that everybody else could.
Right.
We can look at Pennsylvania slightly differently because of its Quaker background, which had a slightly less, we're here to practice our way and nobody else gets to practice that way. But we don't have to go that far among the founding fathers. George Washington wrote back and forth with the Hebrew congregation of Newport, Rhode Island in 1790. So not like, all that recently, but this is George Washington writing back and forth. And George Washington says, and I'm going to misquote, no doubt, that he envisioned a nation in which Jews had free practice of Judaism. Now, this was not executed necessarily very well. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to stop your video until you want to join us and speak, if that's okay. Rachel, by the way, says they were deist, the founding fathers. However, it was not always legal for a Jew to vote in the state of New York, for example. So who counted as a full American early on tended to be a white male Christian, mostly Protestant. Catholics were seldom included in this. I mean, with the exception of like Maryland, which had a, sort of Catholic undercurrent. So, but it's not specifically white nationalist or Christian nationalist. So
No, not
when
yet.
do we get an articulation of Christian nationalism, as you mentioned it, Pastor Hughes?
It's hard to say. I don't know. Let me be honest. I don't know when. I don't know when this happened. What I do know is that, in the late 70s, there was a huge political shift toward Christian nationalism that sort of gave it fire. There was an unholy alliance between political parties and Christian fundamentalist movements that were happening across the country. And that was sort of the start of it, where this whole idea of being Christian is being American, and never, you can't have one without the other. That began with Jerry Falwell and some of those GOP politicians back in that time era. And so it just sort of
it began
snowballed.
Actually a little earlier.
A little earlier, okay.
But you're absolutely right to peg it there. So this is an amazing book that I highly recommend. I'm probably going to reread it because now that I'm talking about this stuff. This is called One Nation Under God by Kevin Kruse, subtitled How Corporate America Invented Christian America. So anybody remember Billy Graham? Okay, so Billy Graham was tasked by corporatists in the late 1930s who feared that FDR was leading us down the socialist route. And Billy Graham, at the instigation of a number of corporate titans, created libertarian Christianity. That is, one couldn't be a Christian and also share the wealth. That wealth sharing was against the free market, and Christianity was for the free market, that it was unchristian. So that's where that crystallizes, of course, in the moral majority in the 70s, because in the 70s, what you end up with is, first of all, the first person to have a national prayer breakfast at the White House was Nixon, and it was with Billy Graham. And so you are absolutely correct, Pastor Hughes, that we don't get this sort of Christian nationalism stuff, this specific type of Christianity in the White House, in the popular imagination, until we end up with this moral majority movement, which is popularized to radicalize the anti-abortion forces. It's why abortion is so key here.
Specifically, then that was the target, right?
That is the target.
That
Roe
is the
v.
target.
Wade was one of the catalysts.
Yes. Yeah.
And so what do we end up with out of that? We end up with the re-emergence of a number of classic tropes. Now, while we have a protester with regard on our Facebook page about how we should never be using any Ibram Kendi, one of Ibram Kendi's key insights is that racism is non-ideological. It's always for the purpose of somebody making more money. And Rachel writes before I miss it, in the 1740s, we had Jonathan Edwards in the First Great Awakening. In the 1820s, we had the Wesley Brothers in the Second Great Awakening. World War II started the Third Great Awakening, and the third is dying out. Yes, the Great Awakenings are a very interesting phenomenon to look at, especially by virtue of the fact that some of them were anti-slavery and then were suborned and became, because Christianity had Protestantism had an anti-slavery component in the early 1700s, and then was switched over to become pro-slavery with a different reading. And therefore we end up with and I'm not a scholar on this, I'm just quoting what I recently read in Professor Joshi's book, that we end up with a split between African-American churches and white American Protestant churches on these issues. Hello, Nanette.
And that is talked about in this book, that backwards. It's called What Kind of Christianity? A History of Slavery and Anti-Black Racism in the Presbyterian Church. And I'm Presbyterian, so I read about Presbyterian churches, but it talks about that extensively in this book. It talks about how the shift, and how the shift went from, and it was really political, it was deeply political. The party of Lincoln, which orchestrated the emancipation of American slaves, then took a shift, and it sort of flip-flopped, and it left the churches split. So you had the Northern Church and the Southern Church, where the Northern Church was more leaning toward abolition, and the Southern Church was leaning more toward keeping things as they were, maintaining status quo. And he talks about that extensively, how it was such a political maneuver that the church sort of got swept up in.
And I'm learning a whole lot about this, right? Reverend Tanya's on the call, and Reverend Tanya is has more ministerial qualifications than most people, including a Methodist ordination, and she taught me a little bit about the history of Methodism, that there is, in fact, a anti-slavery branch of the Methodist Church, and there is a less anti-slavery branch. And it turns out that the quote-unquote free Methodists today are the Methodists who are still attached to some of the racist history of Methodist church traditions, and the United Methodists are not. So this is complicated in a nutshell. So what happens in the 80s? In the 80s, as we have this crystallization between white evangelicals and anti-abortion, and the integration of this libertarianism branch of Christianity, they are all on board for the Reagan Revolution. And we end up with what is basically a public culture of mean, as in meanness, as in suddenly it is Christian to let people fall by the wayside. It is Christian to not help people. It is Christian to have a free market that punishes the poor. And it is also Christian to exclude.
And this is where the prosperity gospel really started to take hold within churches.
So tell us about the prosperity gospel.
Oh gosh, of course. I brought it up, so now I got to explain it, right? So the prosperity gospel is not a monolithic thing, but some of the basic tenets of the prosperity gospel is that if you invest your money in the church, God will invest blessings into you. And so, and by default, if you find yourself in dire straits, it's because you didn't give. It's because you did not invest. So it's really this whole ideology that God blesses and curses according to your giving, and that if you want
didn't
to
Luther protest against this?
What's that?
Didn't Luther protest against
this?
Oh,
of course. That was the whole Protestant Reformation, was about that very thing. Like, you can't buy your way to heaven. You can't buy your way out of sin. You can't do that. That was in the 1600s, right? And so we've come full circle, where the prosperity gospel says that your punishment comes from your lack of investing your money, and that if you want more money, then you have to invest that money into the church or your pastor or whatever. Give it to God, basically, is how.
And would you say that the prosperity gospel flourished so well in the United States because the ground was laid for it by Calvinism and the understanding that if you are wealthy, you deserve it?
I would say it comes straight from capitalism. I would say I mean, yeah, Calvinism to a certain degree, but I would say it's more from capitalism. What American American history after the Civil War, America rebuilt itself because of churches, because America had no more money, because they'd spent all their money killing each other, right? And so now you have this nation that needs to rebuild its infrastructure. And so they had to rely on institutions, um, religious institutions that had, when all of this was happening, people were still giving to these institutions. So you have these churches that were able to fill in the gaps that the U.S. government could not. So, okay, this town has been obliterated by war. Well, we don't have enough money or resources to go in to build your town, but we can give the local churches money. We can fund them in their community efforts. You want to build a new, rebuild the school. Okay, well, here's some grant money. You rebuild a school. And so a lot of the Reconstruction era of America was funded and done by the church. So the church had a lot of funds, a lot of money, and people had died and left endowments to the church. So the churches, this is why you have these big, huge churches that were built in the city, because they were pillars of the community. They helped the community. They provided a service to the community, and it was funded by the government. And so,
and of course,
go ahead.
A footnote to all of that. This goes into some of the white Christian privilege stuff and supports that. Churches get a tax break.
Exactly.
So all of that church money is untaxed.
It's untaxed.
However, the only houses of worship that get that tax break are houses of worship that fall into a congregational model.
Yes, autonomy.
So, Jews, in large part, American Jews, created a congregational model in response to the church loophole. Exactly. One can see the growth of synagogue life in America in response to that tax break. Right. Similarly, on a counterpoint on this, a number of non-Christian religions don't get the same tax break because they don't have a congregationalist model. Buddhists don't found temples in the same way. Sikhs and Muslims have different ways of gathering, and they're not in the same model as what we're talking about. So this leads us to a different an emphasis on the church as a way of organizing. Nanette asks, how were Jews organized before the congregationalist model? Well, Nanette, we didn't back in the day, you didn't need a rabbi to lead prayer. In Eastern Europe in the 1700s and 1800s, right, the Shalom Aleichem Fiddler on the Roof model, right? If you watch Fiddler on the Roof, the rabbi is not some great educated model citizen in town. Rather, the rabbi is basically the shmendrik who knows enough Hebrew to teach the kids Hebrew and to read Torah on Saturdays. But most towns would bring in big preachers and stuff like that once in a while. So we didn't have the synagogue as an institution. We had the synagogue as the place that everybody showed up. But again, even in Shalom Aleichem, the traditionalist model, people aren't showing up regularly because it turns out that in the 1700s, in the quote unquote golden age of Eastern European Judaism, still not all of us show up all the time.
I mean, the same could be said for the Christian church in America, especially during, during, and post Civil War. You had itinerant preachers, especially within the Methodist churches, but even most mainline denominations, they couldn't afford a pastor. So what they would do is they would have meetings, people would come together, and then they would say, well, hey, this Sunday we got a treat because someone rode in from Galveston to give us that good word. And so you had this, it wasn't congregational either. And so it sort of evolved.
Right, but I want you to continue talking about church money and the Reconstruction, because I think it's a very important thing for us to know about. But one more footnote before you do that is that to answer Nanette's question even more thoroughly, when Jews set out across the country here, and we can trace Jewish progress. Jews didn't found synagogues when they went to new places. There were two things that Jews needed when they moved to a new place: a place for burials. So you have Jewish cemeteries before you have Jewish places of worship, and somebody to do circumcisions. This is the origin of B'nai B'rith. B'nai B'rith literally means people of the covenant, meaning people of the circumcision. So they would create a circumcision society because you need, well, a mikveh, yes and no, Rachel, but people weren't as rigorous about mikveh back in the 1800s as they are today. The need for those two things, coming into life and a circumcision and going out of life and a place to be buried, was way more important than the need for a synagogue. Anyway, go on to Reconstruction and church wealth.
Sorry. So church wealth was leaned on heavily to sort of fill in the local needs of American society, right? To rebuilding. But what happened was the money started to run out, and the churches started to lose money. And so this is when tithing became more of a thing in Christian churches, because now the government money is running out. And so now we got to get our money from somewhere. We got these big churches, these big Gothic style cathedral churches, and we have to maintain them and we have to keep them going. And so now we need your money. And so the prosperity gospel sort of came out of that movement. Hey, the church is struggling and it's your fault because you're not giving. You're not giving your tithe. And they started to go back into the Old Testament and pull out all of these things out of context. Micah, passages from Micah and the prophets that talk about robbing God. And hey, you're robbing God now because the church is failing. And so the prosperity gospel came out of that. And so the money and the wealth of churches shifted from government sponsorship to private entity, right? Mm-hmm. And so now the money of the wealth of the church comes from the people and not so much the government. And this is just my opinion. I haven't written a book about it, but I think this is where free market and capitalism really infiltrated the religious institutions of America, because now it's all private, and so we can be fast and free about this thing. You're not paying taxes, so go ahead.
Well, and we see this in George H.W. Bush's 1,000 Points of Light.
Yes.
So
yes.
Here in the late 80s and early 90s, Vice President and then President Bush pushes off onto nonprofits, mostly houses of worship, but really other nonprofits, creating what we might now call the nonprofit industrial complex, the responsibility of taking care of Americans.
Yes.
As opposed to government, because of course, in the wake of Reagan, government is bad.
That's right.
Inefficient. And so we see all of these threads coming together, and they are anti-socialism, they are anti-communitarianism, they are anti-communal responsibility, and they are pro-hyper-individualism. Underlying all of this idea that somehow or another our houses of worship are going to pick up where our society fails. There's also, in my mind, and I spoke about this a little bit with Reverend Tanya and Reverend Raquel last week, there is so little trust in our society. The number one way of combating poverty is giving people money. We saw this. The greatest amount of progress against childhood poverty in the last 100 years was undertaken during the ARPA funding after COVID, when families struggling with poverty received money. You know what's amazing about a family that's struggling with poverty? They know how to spend money to be less poor.
Yes.
And we don't trust people who are struggling to take care of themselves. Only rich people are trusted to spend money.
That's by design, though. That's by design.
Of course it's by design,
right?
Because, the flip side of this is another book that's been in my mind, and we spoke about it a couple of weeks ago, which is this winners take all philosophy, that somehow or another, it's rich people who are going to come up with the brilliant solution for healthcare and
Yes,
poverty
yes.
and segregation. And
Meanwhile, the rich are doing everything in their power to shirk that responsibility. They don't want to pay taxes. They don't want to do any of this stuff
also
unless it makes them money.
what that author points out, and believe it or not, if you scroll up, it's still in this in the chat, because of course this is the chat that continued from the last time. So this was what is the book? It was Winners Take All by Anand Giridharadas. And he points out, so he is he's been through McKinsey and the use of the McKinsey consulting method for trying and solving social problems. And what he points out is all these big philanthropies, their goal is to use the McKinsey method to end up with a win-win. What does the win-win mean? The win-win means something good happens, but nobody who has all the goods has to give anything up. PBS did on the NewsHour just in the last week, may have been 10 days ago, did a piece on how challenging it is to keep receiving food assistance. That getting food stamps requires a huge amount of paperwork. Because again, we don't trust people who are struggling to just need stuff. And again, there are so many restrictions on how you can spend food stamps, all of that stuff. And it turns out that they profiled this, creative guy who used to work for Google, who has come up with an app. And the app will help you do all the paperwork and keep all your due dates for all the paperwork so that we could still receive our food assistance. As opposed to a brilliant guy from Google saying, hey, you know what? Let's redesign our government program. Let's figure out how to actually get people what they need more easily. Instead of
the CDC has made this report consistently since the pandemic that crime is directly related to employment. And so if
shock.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. You mean if we give people jobs, they won't commit crime? Like it's it's weird that you're talking about, well, we don't trust the people. We don't trust these people to use the fund. And I heard this growing up. I grew up in Atlanta. All of my life growing up, I grew up with this idea of the welfare queen. I grew up with this idea that there are people who want to take advantage of the system. And my mother was one of them. And I remember when my mother got food stamps for the first time, it was almost humiliating, because people who we thought were friends would say, you're just going to spend it on things that you don't need. And even, I even have some family members who would say that. And I remember thinking, well, I don't understand where they're getting that idea from. My mother knows how to take $1 and stretch it forever. My mother was very good with money. However, maybe the problem is we just don't have enough money. Maybe that needs to be changed. Why are we punishing the people who need this? It's not like people who are on food stamps don't work. There are people who don't, but that's not the majority.
Well, and the welfare queen, of course, is an invention of the right.
Of course.
An invention, and I don't even want to make left and right accusations here. It's an invention of those who believe that those who are struggling with poverty pretty much deserve it.
Well, Noam Chomsky once said that in order for capitalism to truly thrive, there has to be a have and a have not. There has to be. And if you don't have someone who's going to take it, then it doesn't justify, if you don't have someone to oppress, then there's no justification to be an oppressor. There has to be someone who gets the shaft, and someone who takes the shaft, and someone who gives it. So it's sort of like, if we're not going to make a welfare queen, let's create one. If you're not going to be one, we're going to create one.
Well, and speaking from our shared religious backgrounds, one of the things we've talked about is an attitude of abundance versus an attitude of scarcity. You and I both have young people in our households. God bless them. Thank God for them, because, you know, I wouldn't feel the blessing of the universe on a regular day without my daughter and my son. My daughter is a picky eater, an extremely picky eater. She has never gone hungry in her life. However, she has an incredible anxiety about not getting the food that she will be able to feel is hers, so that she will not be hungry, which comes across to me sometimes as a distrust in our household, right? Like, her parents have never let her go hungry, right? We will make her food, even if it's not something that she likes. And so I feel like this is at the heart of some of the challenges that we face. We are not all 10-year-olds, though. We should be able to have a more advanced understanding that when we help people, it's not because they are helpless, difficult, obstinate thieves trying to make a living off of our handout. It is because people who are genuinely in need are genuinely in need. And I will be less in need if there is less need around me. And if I have certain advantages, for me to act like those advantages are threatened if other people also have advantages is very short-sighted. And it buys into the hyper-individualist, hyper-capitalist approach that says only by the, you know, pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, right? You know, our extremely bootstrap-oriented Supreme Court justice, who nonetheless doesn't pay for anything himself.
Right.
So Rachel asks, with the U.S. Army and Navy unable to meet enlistment goals, why can't ages 70 to 33 get a job, drugs, etc.? Both programs offer 3 meals a day, a place to live, a paycheck, and training. The Army used to be the employer of last resort, no more. Well, I'll tell you, it's not so easy to get a position in the Army and the Navy, as since I tried and was rejected.
Yeah.
And I'm now too old.
But I mean, because the military is bought and paid for, just like politicians. I mean, you know, I served in the military, and it was difficult for me to get in. Simply, well, no, it wasn't. It was easy for me to get in because I was already educated. They didn't have to spend so much money getting me spun up because I already had the education. And so you have to score a certain level on your tests now. And yeah, she's right. There used to be a time where, okay, you can't get a job at the grocery store. You can't get a job at your uncle, your father's company. You can't. So just join the Marines or join the Army. Now, the military is competing for jobs just like any other company, just like any corporation, right? Because they need that money too. I mean, this is where capitalism comes in. There's this idea that, you know, if we can't get it, then we're going to have to take it. And so we have to create the circumstances so that we can get it. So of course, my phone rings because I'm doing something. Sorry about that. Let's create a situation where we're going to need to get people to recruit people. Let's create a war. Let's create a conflict. Let's create a shortage of something so that we can justify our existence instead of just saying, hey, maybe we don't need this anymore.
Off of the military? I mean,
what's that?
Who's really making money off the military? Eisenhower pointed that out in the late 1950s.
It's corporations, right?
Yeah. Right. That, you know, no bid contracts.
Exactly.
Currently, our neighbors our Quaker neighbors there's a Friends Committee that's been working on this issue. There's a slush fund in the budget, an unallocated slush fund in the military budget that is this open, use it for whatever you want. It's not designated. And it seems like, considering how much is designated for how much in the military budget, for them to have, you know, a wild card section of the budget of, you know, $500 million or $500 billion or whatever it is, it's some insane amount of money, is crazy, right? That just in case. when the way our government works is just in case can be handled on the fly.
Exactly.
We don't need to plan for a just in case for the military. That's already the best funded.
That's it. And that's the argument. The argument is we don't need this slush fund for preparedness. We're already prepared. We can go anywhere we need to go at any time. So why do we need all of this reserve funds? For what? That's the question. And, there have been so many movements to sort of, they use words like, well, let's defund this and defund that. And many a times it's not defunding, it's just reallocation of funds. It's saying that if you have $500 billion in a reserve, as a war chest, as we said in the hood back in the day, if you got 500 billion in a war chest, what's the problem of taking 1 billion and reallocating that 1 billion to feed Americans? If the military's purpose is to protect Americans, what better way to protect Americans than by feeding them, making sure that they have everything that they need, food, clothing, and shelter, right?
So just FYI, if you're interested in what this is, it's not a reserve fund. This is the unfunded priorities list. Right. This is not because Rachel points out that there's a war reserve fund. No, this is an unfunded priorities list. And Reverend Tanya says, but there has to be a scapegoat so one can feel superior to another. Make people feel inferior, and you create a group of people that will do whatever they feel is necessary to survive.
That's capitalism right there.
So
that's it.
So the creator, there's a wonderful French scholar whose name, of course, I forget, who was the mathematician who created the mathematical system for plate tectonics. And the latter part of his career, he ended up, oh, sorry, that was not what I meant to put there. That was something else. In the latter part of his career, he worked on creating communitarian villages and societies for people with disabilities in France. And he said that the measure of human society is not in who is the fastest, but in how well we make sure no one falls behind. Because we are not wolves.
Yes.
Because we understand that a person who might be physically slower might actually be the person who has the idea that saves us all.
Yeah. And if you talk to anthropologists, they will tell you the mark of human civilization began when they found evidence of early humans treating each other's wounds. They found skeletons of early humans with bones that have been broken and knitted together. That is the beginning of civilization. That's when we separated ourselves from animals. When we looked at our broken and our weak and said, we're going to take care of you. That's what makes us human beings.
Right. And we are supposed to do that. However, we have decided in American society that we don't do that.
Right.
So just for clarification, the unfunded priorities list offers a backdoor for boosting military spending, a practice that has received criticism from both sides of the aisle. Even the Pentagon is on record opposing the unfunded priorities list and urging Congress to reconsider this approach. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin himself publicly confirmed he would support ending this unnecessary and problematic requirement. So this is not about our readiness.
No.
It's about our attachment and laziness and actually figuring out how to do better.
Well, I think it's our aversion it's our aversion to dipping into our own pockets to make that happen. We just don't want to pay for it. We just don't want to do it. Our government the corporations just don't want to fork over any amount of money that would solve the country's problem. They just don't want to do it. They would rather put it on the backs of taxpayers or put it on the backs of churches or any other institution than to just do it themselves, which they're supposed to do. They're supposed to protect us. They're supposed to support us. And they just don't want to do it.
So I think we have a tradition now, and this is our third, so we're beginning to have a pattern.
Yes. We're getting stronger.
That's right. So our topic list that we started off with today, right, was winners take all capitalism, and can we see a way forward? How can we improve public discourse? And what's next for multi-faith? In the last week, a couple of people have come to me and said, we need places for our people, whomever our people is. One of these was Bishop Lee Miller in the Lutheran Synod. Two of these were Reverend Tanya and Reverend Raquel. We need people to have opportunities for difficult conversations in our lives. So I am proposing an idea that I will, with at least one African-American partner, and I have a partner in mind who's not Pastor Hughes because he's got a day job already. We will structure conversations not unlike this one, but more participatory, because the idea will be to get people involved in the conversation around difficult topics. Bishop Miller was thinking that it would be really interesting if we had sort of a place to talk about religion and politics so that we learn how to do it better. Because we're not going to solve anything if we don't actually talk about what bothers us about religion and politics. And so I'm going to put together a program, and it's going to be more than one conversation, like a series that I would bring to a house of worship, bring to a community center, and invite people, and people will buy in. And I'm going to try to get funding for it. And then Reverend Tanya and Reverend Raquel said, we were brainstorming about a similar topic, similar idea. And we said, Reverend Tanya said that she feels a lot of us are grappling with grief. And in grappling with grief, we are doing so in a way that is not allowing us to confront it. Instead, we are having our grief come out in other emotions, in anger, in frustration, in resentment. And because at heart, we're struggling with loss. So I thought we would have another series where we would use some of the lessons of circles, of restorative and racial healing circles, and say, instead of, what is it that I feel oppressed by, or when has my identity been challenged, we'd say, hi, Chris. We would say, I'm going to turn off your video because we are near the end. We would say, so let's the two of us go and talk about a moment, a difficulty, a loss that we've experienced, and how we're coping or not coping. And then we'd share with the group that experience as a catalyst for us to begin to see ourselves as part of a community of strugglers with loss. Because part of the challenge that we're facing is that people are not talking with one another about anything of substance except at each other. And what we really need, so this is, our new tradition, the tradition that I was alluding to, is what are we going to do next? I mean, Pastor Hughes and I can come up with stuff to talk about. That's not a problem. But the question is not just what are we going to talk about, but what are we going to do? And so those are some ideas that I'm working on. I would love all of your participation and thoughts about it. So please contact me either in the chat or directly. I'm easy to find on both Facebook and via email. For those of you who knew me in my voice manifestation, don't send me email at the voice address. I don't get that. Send me email at rabbijonathan@yahoo.com, which I'm putting in the chat, or Jonathan Freirich, if you can spell Freirich, at gmail.com. But Pastor Hughes, what do you think about what next steps for us? Not just what we're going to talk about, what we're going to do next.
Well, I do firmly support creating a space where we can have these difficult conversations. One of the things that I find challenging for me in my ministry is the total lack of an ability to have conflicting ideologies. I mean, the lack of two conflicting ideologies having a conversation together. That's very difficult. it's difficult to say something that is counter to what another person believes without an argument. And my my challenge has always been to frame things in a way that opens that's sort of vulnerable, in the sense that we can sort of get people talking even though we disagree. It didn't used to be that bad. I don't remember it being this polarizing to say something that someone disagrees with, but now it is, and that's just the way it is. We have to deal with it. But I think creating a forum, creating a space, creating a platform where people can talk about these things. We can talk about grief. We can talk about trauma. We can talk about these things in community, because this is sort of where the rubber meets the road. We can talk about how certain ideologies have been very negative for us, and how they have negatively impacted us. And maybe we can get to the root of some of that trigger, because it's what it is. We would get triggered instead of knowing and not knowing how to respond.
You've thought about this for a long time, because
yes, I have.
Because I had a meeting this week, and I mentioned you in the meeting, and the person Googled you and found something that you wrote when you were living in Hungary about safe spaces.
Oh my gosh! Wow! Wow!
So here, I think is when you talk about the rubber hitting the road. Let's talk about the distinction between a space where it's safe to talk about things that many of us find uncomfortable, and how that's not what people have been calling safe spaces, where they're not made uncomfortable at all.
Exactly.
And I think we need to be pro healthy discomfort, not pro no discomfort.
Right, because a safe space is not the same as an echo chamber. In fact, and this is sort of the misconception that a safe space is a space where we all agree on the same things. Well, I can be myself here because everybody. No, that's not necessarily what a safe space is. A safe space is a place or a forum where we are both free to be who we are, but we are who we are in community, in a sense that we can talk to each other about. And I can say, you know what, I disagree with you on this. Tell me why you feel this way. And then we can go back and forth, and it doesn't have to come to we're enemies. It doesn't mean that we are enemies of each other. I am not your enemy. In fact, I'm your friend if I'm willing to be in disagreement with you, but disagree in love,
So Pastor Hughes, in your most private space, with you and your amazing spouse, who happens to also be a pastor, and your fantastic children, do you say whatever you want? Did we lose you?
I don't know.
Oh, there
what
you are.
Was. Hello?
Yeah, you're here. Okay. You're still here. So
okay.
Do you say whatever you want in your home?
I do not. Not without context.
Correct. So our speech, we use filters of love.
Right.
And care and compassion.
Right.
Because the thing that comes to mind first for me, I'm an imperfect person. I'm not always a good person. I have to work to be a better person.
Right.
And that means that the first thing that I'm annoyed by or want to say, or all those sorts of things, are not the thing that I get to say to my spouse, whom I love, who is my partner in life, because I care too much about her to give her my unvarnished, unthought through thought.
That's exactly right.
And the same for my children, although more so for my children, right? There was an amazing song by Arrested Development back in the 90s, for those of you who remember Arrested Development, called, thank you, at least I'm not alone, Mama's Always on Stage. And I took that to heart as a parent, because we get frustrated, we get irritable, we get angry. I grew up in a household where we're on a hair trigger with each other, where the level of annoyance between us was awful. And so if we have a healthy, functional household where we are careful about what we say, how much more so should we be careful in public? This freedom to say what we want is not actual. We don't get to say whatever we want. So, Oh, so Rachel has offered us the defense priority list is not as large as you say and is very interesting. So we have,
I did some homework.
okay, thank you,
I
Rachel.
love it. I love it.
So feel free to, we will save the chat and share it with anybody who wants it. But I think, honestly, Pastor Hughes, I think our discussion for next time is set. We're going to continue this. I feel like we need to talk about the difference between safe to speak and safe to be comfortable. And what
Okay.
does it mean to actually create a space where
We
people
never
feel
we never got to finish this white Christian nationalism thing, but okay.
well, sure.
We never
Well, we
got
can
to.
continue.
We didn't
I
get to
have
the
some
core of it.
I have some partners for that. So okay,
Yeah.
Christian nationalism. I'm taking notes.
We'll finish that, and then we'll get into this safe space thing, because I think that's a very important conversation as well.
Finish up and safe space in all its ramifications. All right.
Miss Massey makes a very, 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 very great point. She says she finds that people who think they're at odds with each other are often really saying the same thing, only from a different entry point, maybe. Yes, and this
absolutely.
This happens to me and my wife all the time. Oh my God. And it's almost like my wife will say something and I will say, I don't know about that. And then we'll go back and forth, back and forth. And then at the end, we're like, oh yeah, we're saying the same thing. It's like, and so we always have to question when we get, when the trigger gets in, we always have to pause and really listen to each other. Okay, what really are you saying to me? And then once we get past that, we're able to come together. We may still disagree on delivery, or we disagree on maybe some semantics, but at the end of the day, we're saying the same. We have the same desires, the same feelings, and that is very, very important. Thank you for saying that, Nanette. That's very, very important.
So I am going to ask Pastor Hughes, are you really thinking you might be available on the Wednesday following Easter and not totally tired out?
I am reasonably sure that the Wednesday following Easter, I will be up to the task.
Okay, so we are going to aim for Wednesday, April 3rd, same bat time, same bat channel. And so noon, I will update our link. I will update the event on Facebook. I will continue sending out my broad email. Please recommend this conversation to anybody. Please come, and I only keep people off video because I figure I'll put you on video if you want to participate. If you don't want to participate, we don't. We'd love to see your faces, but we don't need to broadcast them everywhere. So
just our faces.
Just our faces. So, but please take this opportunity to be in touch with us and expand this. So we'll do this live and in person in different places, and we'll do this on Zoom. We'll create structured conversations, and thank you all for participating. Thank you, Nanette, and Rachel, and Catherine, and Chris, and Reverend Tanya, all for showing up and for participating and for your thoughts in the. I didn't necessarily acknowledge everyone's thoughts in the chat, and I apologize for that. But truly, it's an honor and a blessing to be with all of you. Pastor Hughes, do you want to offer us a concluding blessing as we leave today?
Yes. Let's make this as ecumenical and multi-faith as possible. Yeah. May God bless you. May God keep you. May God make space to shine upon you, be gracious to you, and grant you peace.
Amen, Stella. Nice adapted quote from the Blessing in Numbers. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Blessing.
I figured you know what that was.
Well, I'd better. Otherwise, what kind of rabbi am I? So thank you all. I'm going to stop the recording, and I'm going to stop us from